U.S. wheat exports are in jeopardy after the discovery of a rogue genetically modified wheat strain. Billions in food exports are potentially at stake. Some countries, including Japan and South Korea, have suspended some imports of American wheat. The GM variant developed by the agricultural giant Monsanto has never actually been approved for human consumption. Somehow it landed up in wheat fields in Oregon. Monsanto's stock is down 4% on the day, and July wheat futures trading on the Chicago Board of Trade were down 0.5% lower for the second day in a row. All right, and joining us now from Cincinnati with a closer look at this developing story is Louise Gartner. She's the owner of Spectrum Commodities. Louise, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let us get
You're welcome.
straight. Thank you, Louise. Some major buyers of U.S. wheat have now canceled imports, including Japan, which is the largest importer of U.S. wheat. We have other Asian countries are now just increasing inspections after discovery, holding off on a ban. The U.S. is the biggest exporter of wheat, so how bad is this?
Well, that's a good question. I think the jury is still out on that, actually. This is a major development. Obviously, GMO wheat is not supposed to even exist. So the fact that it showed up in a farmer's field is unnerving, to say the least. The flip side of that is it's in Western white wheat. It's a small percentage of the total wheat crop. It's a specific type of wheat, and it's also in a smaller region of the country. So the question becomes, how widespread is this? We don't know how it got there. We don't know if it's migrated to other types of wheat in other regions. For now, it's not such a big deal. If we can test all the shipments, we can certify that they're GMO-free, but it certainly would become a much bigger deal if we found it in other types of wheat in other parts of the country.
Well, what is the likelihood of this happening? I mean, that GM variant developed by Monsanto has never actually been approved for human consumption. Some say that it landed up in the Oregon farm because that was part of the testing area for that particular variant. So do we know if that area has just been confined to that variant? Do we know what the likelihood is of more GM stuff popping up?
Well, again, the regulations were supposed to be that the test trial wheat was either supposed to be burned, buried, or returned back to Monsanto. So you're right that this showed up in a wheat field is highly unusual. The regulations have obviously not been followed strictly, and there have been some reports through the years that there have been some gaps in the regulations, and there have been some reported incidents of those not following the regulations. So I guess for those who are in the GMO circle, it's not a complete surprise that this happened. But
right.
For most of us outside that circle, it is a surprise, and it certainly should not have happened.
Well, the wheat export is an $8 billion business for the U.S., according to Reuters data. So there's a lot at stake here. And now we have the European Union advising member states to test some wheat shipments from the U.S. EU imports alone make up more than 1.1 million tons of wheat a year. So if some Asian countries are holding back on their purchases, the EU, could this snowball into a big export deficit for the U.S.?
It could, and it probably would if we found GMOs in other types of wheat. Again, for now, it's just in the Western white wheat, which is a much smaller market, but it's an important market for the Asian countries. And that's why this is potentially the tip of the iceberg as far as total exports go. The Western white wheat is again mostly for Asia. They could go to other sources, primarily Australia, but for U.S. the U.S. wheat industry, this is a very important issue for us, that we assure our customers that the shipments are GMO free. We'll test all the shipments that they require or request us to do, just to certify that and to assure them that those shipments are safe. And yes, if it starts to spread to other types of wheat, it could become a very big deal and very detrimental to the U.S. wheat export program.
So the U.S. can definitely suffer from this. Who stands to benefit? You mentioned Australia. What about Canada? Which countries could pick up the slack?
Well, if it's just Western white wheat, it's probably mostly going to be Australia. They also raise a soft white wheat that Asian countries do prefer as well. Canada primarily is a hard red spring wheat and some hard red winter wheat. Not a lot of soft wheat grown there, so there aren't a lot of quality growers in the world that could quickly pick up the slack. I think Canada would try to do that if the market were to really come under a lot of pressure here in the United States. So most likely what would happen in the cash markets, you would see kind of a two-tiered market develop where every cargo is inspected and certified before it actually leaves the ports. Those cargoes would be a much higher value, obviously, than anything that was contaminated with the GMO wheat. The GMO wheat would probably just get dumped into the feed channel then.
Louise, what does this mean for me, the consumer? The USDA said that even if GM did actually enter the food chain, there's no danger to public health. Is this really proven at this point? Should I be concerned about what I'm buying? What kind of products would this wheat be used in?
It's unlikely that it got very far, first of all, and there really has not been enough evidence to show that it's a danger to humans. There was significant fear of that probability when these test trials were being done, and our customers, primarily the Asian customers, but also the Europeans, specified that they would not buy any U.S. wheat if we approved GMO varieties. So that's why the U.S. wheat industry determined that it did not want GMO varieties, and that's why Monsanto dropped the test trials altogether. But for a consumer, at this point, I don't think there's anything to be afraid of as far as GMOs getting into the food supply. We have GMO corn, we have GMO soybeans, and they have not determined that those are detrimental to health. I certainly understand the concern there, and again, that's why the test trials were dropped, because there's just too much pushback against these types of things. But by and large, at this point, it certainly doesn't seem that this should pose a significant risk to humans.
Okay, let's hope not. And thank you so much for that insight and analysis. Louise Gartner, owner of Spectrum Commodities, joining us live from Cincinnati. Thank you so much.